Find refuge from old family dynamics, guided sleep meditation. There is a dull, hollow ache located deep behind the navel, and a habitual Latinite routine of replaying childhood family dynamics that leaves your center feeling completely unmoored. You lie still in the quiet room, mentally unspooling the ancient, tangled threads of primary rejections, trying to retroactively balance an emotional scale that was tipped decades ago. Your lower stomach retains a tight, cold constriction, replaying the unpredictable moods of a formative home environment, as if the safety of your present life depends on repairing the cracks in your ancestry. This persistent inner tracking operates like a traveler trying to draw fresh water from an ancient laundry stone well shaft, exhausting your vital energy to dredge an explanation out of a silence that cannot answer. The throat carries a faint, dry ache from the phrases you carefully guarded as a child, preserving the old family script out of a silent, anxious habit. The air around your bed carries the deep, grounding scent of wild mountain thyme, mixed with the crisp, cooling essence of a Letotum windstorm moving over dry cedar bark outside the window. You can feel the heavy, unyielding foundation of the floor supporting your frame, offering a quiet, subterranean sanctuary that requires no corrected lineage and no perfectly balanced historical ledger to permit a full release. The room does not ask you to present a beautifully reconciled family tree to deserve its quiet shelter. My gentle promise to you tonight is that the empty space left by early neglect is not a fatal structural defect, but an open chamber where your consciousness is already completely valid, without needing to re-engineer the past. We are not going to force these ancient family knots to instantly untie themselves, nor will we demand that you pretend the primary fractures did not hurt. We are simply going to let your presence drop beneath the windy surface of your history, allowing the old well shaft to sit quietly in the deep forest while the wild mountain briars grow over its stone throat naturally out of sight. The intellect continuously assumes it can secure an absolute emotional safety by forcing our primary caretakers to finally understand the depth of their impact, operating under the fragile belief that relitigating our childhood rooms is the only way to heal the initial void. Yet, profound tranquility never grows from trying to fix the behavioral dynamics of people who lack the structural capacity to change their shape. The surprising paradox of our emotional suffering is that the early lack of care brings a specific, clean wounding, but the mind multiplies this pain into a lifetime of agony by trying to manually fill the empty well with a constant stream of retrospective explanations. We believe that maintaining this internal defensive vigilance ensures our protection, but deep Buddhist insight reveals that this ancestral tracing is the exact net that entangles our immediate spirit. Dear friend, right now, maybe you have felt this exhausting internal labor too, the feeling of being entirely bound by the volatile conditions of a house you left years ago. If it feels right, let your lower stomach relax without trying to prove your independence or your complete freedom from the lineage to the dark. There is no requirement to settle the emotional accounts of your generational history in a single evening. The ancient habit of replaying family roles that has locked itself into your nervous system cannot be dissolved by a sudden, aggressive act of the will. The ancestral movements of your family are merely passing, conditioned clouds, not a solid, unchanging indictment of your personal worth. The true nature of your awareness is like the laundry well shaft itself, fully capable of allowing the wild green ferns to carpet its floor, transforming an ancient emptiness into a silent, rich sanctuary that requires no surface water from the past to remain beautifully complete. In a short while, our path will take us high up a rugged cliff face during a Letotum windstorm, where a joiner tries to hammer an asymmetric wooden window screen left by his volatile father into perfect alignment. We will discover how easily the cedar splits when we refuse to honor its grown grain, and how the uneven morning light filters onto the floor beautifully just as it is. But for these next few moments, let your breathing drop into its own unmanaged depth, a slow, natural rise and fall that requires no analytical vigilance to keep you steady. You can let the historical courtroom stay completely vacant tonight, letting your awareness settle like a smooth river stone resting at the very bottom of the dry well. where the deep moss cushions the floor without asking a single muscle of your body to resolve the imbalances of your home before the wind dies down in the forest. The deep lines running through old mountain wood often reveal the specific climate of the season, when the tree first pushed out its earliest rings. High upon a rugged cliff face during a Latotem windstorm, a young joiner named Kenzo worked within a weathered mountain hut with a sense of intense internal restriction. The air inside the drafty workshop smelled sharply of dry cedar bark, cold rain on moss, and the bitter scent of wild mountain thyme. Kenzo had spent 3 long years living in this high-altitude refuge, yet his mind remained completely paralyzed by the lingering memory of his early home. His father, a volatile master carpenter whose approval Kenzo had spent his entire youth trying to secure, had abandoned the family trade in a fit of sudden bitterness, leaving behind a household filled with unexpressed tension and unresolved dynamic imbalances. The elder craftsman had never offered a single word of recognition or warmth, leaving Kenzo to absorb the silent weight of his erratic temper completely alone. Kenzo carried a physical anchor to this difficult history, a large, asymmetric wooden window screen that his father had constructed decades ago during a period of intense domestic instability. This screen sat directly in the center of his workbench, its cedar slats grown unevenly, warped by time, and out of geometric alignment. The young joiner treated this screen as an indispensable riddle that had to be forcibly solved, operating under the hidden anxious belief that if he could hammer the warped joints into perfect symmetry, he would finally repair the foundational safety of his childhood home. Yet, the relentless effort of forcing the aged timber was fracturing the delicate wood. The dry cedar fibers groaned under the heavy blows of his mallet, the wood pins splintered against the grain, and the frame threatened to split entirely under his hands. Kenzo ignored the structural limits of the material, his own stomach locking into a tight knot behind the navel, as the wind forced the cold rain through the cracks in the wall. He believed that forcing this screen to fit a standard frame was the only way to justify his place in the lineage. The wood was grown under a bad season, and the grain is completely stubborn under my iron tools. Kenzo muttered into the howling gale, his palms raw from the friction of the rough cedar. If I abandon this screen or leave the joints crooked, the family imbalance will remain a permanent failure, and my whole life will look like an incomplete house to the village below. I am holding the exact work my father abandoned, yet the wood is breaking before it ever turns straight. Near a low stone brazier at the back of the hut sat a wise hermit monk named Master Satoshi, who had spent decades restoring ancient neglected structures along the mountain ridges. He sat quietly on a thick straw mat, his skin lined like the dry bark and his old hands smelling faintly of wood oil and cold well water. He had watched the young joiner struggle against the warped cedar for hours, noting how the traveler's body mimicked the rigid, defensive locking of the frame. Master Satoshi stood up slowly from the fire, walking deliberately through the drafty room until he stood right beside the exhausted workbench. He did not offer a formulaic greeting, nor did he attempt to take the iron tools from Kenzo's hands. Instead, he reached out and placed a single small green fern leaf directly into one of the wide asymmetric gaps between the warped cedar slats, letting the joiner observe how the delicate plant rested easily in the crooked space. "Look at how the forest leaf finds a home inside the irregularity of this screen," Master Satoshi said softly, his voice cutting through the windstorm like a low bell. "You have turned this joinery into a permanent trial, Kenzo. You believe that by punishing this old cedar with the continuous weight of your mallet, you are executing a necessary correction against the man who grew it crooked. But you are simply shredding the timber that protects you, because you refuse to look at the immediate design of the wood. You are demanding that the mountain storm resolve a structural growth that was finished winters ago." Kenzo looked down at the uneven screen, the green leaf dancing slightly in the wind but remaining safe within the wide gap. "The frame was built in complete anger," he replied, his teeth grinding as the wind rattled the door. "To leave it crooked feels like a total surrender to a broken house. The screen is all I have left to fix." Master Satoshi reached out and unlatched the heavy iron clamps that held the window frame in place. letting the joiner feel the sudden, massive shift in balance as the cedar screen tilted naturally toward the light. Look at how the morning filters onto the stone floor. When the struggle is dropped, the old hermit whispered, letting the screen lean against the open window opening, where the sun was beginning to break through the storm clouds. This mountain hut holds its warmth, precisely because it allows the uneven light to enter, without trying to straighten the rays of the sky. It does not preserve its safety by retaining the straightest trees, nor does it require a perfect symmetry to shelter the traveler. When the winter storm warps the branch, the tree does not split its own trunk to prove it was mistreated. It lets the briars grow over the old scars, trusting the forest floor to hold its weight without a single demand for justification. The strength of your survival lives not in the rigid engineering of your ancestry, but in the spacious mind that lets the crooked frame sit in the light while the joiner steps away unburdened. Let the screen rest here on the stone, so your stomach can discover its own breath. The old man turned and returned to the quiet warmth of the stone brazier, leaving the joiner standing alone before the open window. Kenzo remained entirely motionless, the cool, wet air moving across his stomach as the windstorm began to recede down the western cliffs. The physical presence of the irregular screen sitting quietly in the window frame seemed to bypass the defensive calculations of his hypervigilant mind. He looked down at the uneven slats, then out at the vast canyon where the mountain walls stood in absolute silence under the clearing sky, noticing for the first time how the vast landscape sustained its beauty by letting the twisted trees grow where they chose without a single rule to judge their form. He felt the clean, damp air moving across his navel, carrying the faint scent of wild mountain thyme, and he noticed how the tight, cold constriction deep within his center began to loosen. His lower stomach expanded naturally, taking in a slow, deep breath that had been compressed since the first days of his youth. He had been trying to extract a sense of safety out of complete self-punishment, and the sheer effort of keeping the old family drama alive was breaking his life. In the quiet dusk of the high ridge, the first true recognition began to open within his spirit, though the deeper realization of how to walk forward without the need for generational vindication remained waiting in the silent tea annexes of the valley below. Kenzo let his tools drop completely onto the wood shavings, leaving the asymmetric screen to hold its own light undisturbed, as he prepared to step toward the fire with an unhurried, lighter pace that required no perfect home to prove its own baseline integrity. This gentle turning away from the warped cedar screen does not imply that you must harden your heart against the genuine dynamics of your lineage, nor does it ask you to cultivate a cold indifference that isolates your spirit from the history of your home. The deep insights of the old path never encourage us to become entirely detached or closed off like a frozen slate ledge that refuses to receive the autumn rain. Instead, this quiet clarity points to a much softer way of occupying your existence. The tight constriction behind your navel does not persist simply because your formative years contained genuine chaos or unpredictable storms. The deep exhaustion accumulates when the mind transforms the natural memory of a difficult home into a permanent internal renovation project, continuously resawing the old wood of your childhood to force an ancient relationship to change its shape. When we interpret another person's inability to love us cleanly as a final proof that we are fundamentally broken, we place an immense burden on our current body, layering a heavy layer of self-reproach over the simple reality of the evening. We frequently operate under the internal illusion that by constantly replaying our old family role and keeping our protective defenses high, we are performing a necessary act of loyalty and self-preservation. Yet, deep reflection reveals that this relentless obsession with retrospective alignment is actually a subtle form of spiritual hunger. We are desperately reaching backward to secure a permanent proof of our own basic safety, trying to force a past that has already dissolved to rewrite its history to justify the space we occupy on the earth. This defensive striving creates a secondary layer of emotional depletion, which is far more exhausting than the initial lack of stability in our youth. The natural presence of the crooked frame was a simple characteristic of a stormy environment, an objective condition of the road. Kenzo's true suffering grew from the way his hands frantically gripped the iron tools long after his father had left the bench, fracturing the very cedar that protected his workspace because he could not bear to sit quietly with an asymmetric line, adding a heavy weight of panic on top of the plain reality of the wood shavings. When you practice soft, spacious presence, you are simply learning to witness the wild movements of your internal longing, without immediately picking up the coarse brush of self-judgment. You allow the quiet, unreciprocated moments of your primary relationships to rest openly within your field of awareness, rather than demanding that they look perfectly straight before you give your body permission to relax. This quiet attentiveness creates a vast clearing within the spirit, letting the natural ebb and flow of human validation exist without tearing the fabric of your nervous system under the weight of constant overinvestment. True compassion is the profound willingness to hold your own lonely history with a soft, protective touch, rather than using the sharp needles of self-blame to punish your heart for feeling the cold rain. The old wisdom does not promise that the human valley will suddenly become perfectly warm, or that the lineage you inherit will automatically develop the capacity to hold space for your unique journey. The wind of human confusion will always blow. The seasonal stability of others will naturally shift, and life will leave its irregular markings on the relational paths of your soul. True liberation means developing a completely new way of staying steady beneath these atmospheric changes. Instead of cracking your own wood because a primary door remains closed in the background, you learn to look at your awareness as an entire vast forest, well that is already fully capable of holding its own deep moss without needing a single drop from the surface to remain secure. When you stop treating the imbalances of others as a personal failure that must be fixed by emptying your own core, the tight ache beneath your navel begins to lift entirely. Perhaps you can see this profound truth playing out within your own thoughts during these quiet hours of the night. Think of the immense psychological labor required to continuously check the old architectures of your childhood, to measure your daily right to exist against the volatile responsiveness of a family tree that cannot balance itself, and to maintain the exhausting fiction that you are somehow lacking because you cannot force the past to fit a perfect frame. You are holding your spirit to a strict transaction that leaves no room for the natural alignment of reality. The human heart becomes deeply fatigued when it tries to function as an anxious, unraveled thread rather than resting in the dense fullness of the cloth. In a short while, we will explore a gentle, somatic way to let this internal joiner step back from the edge of the workbench. We will discover how to invite a calm, grounding presence into the specific physical areas where you have been holding on to your old ancestral defenses for far too long. But for right now, let the absolute reality of this insight settle into your awareness. You do not need to possess a perfectly balanced or thoroughly validated history tonight. It is completely safe to acknowledge the dry, unpolished nature of your internal world, allowing your presence to rest like the deep well shaft sitting quietly in the forest, which holds its clarity precisely because it lets the wild green briars grow over its stone throat without any need for a forced friction. If it feels right, allow your awareness to settle more completely into the immediate physical boundary that your body occupies in this quiet room. There is no requirement to adjust to the current speed of your breathing or to force your mind into a posture of sudden, artificial stillness. Perhaps you might simply notice the natural, unmanaged texture of your inhalation, observing how the air moves inward without any nervous direction from your analytical thoughts. Let the delicate muscles surrounding your temples and the deep area right behind your navel soften slightly, creating a tiny bit of clearance where the relational urgency of your history has been tightly stored. You can feel the grounding weight of your spine pressing down into the support beneath you, letting that thick foundation carry the full responsibility of your physical existence. If you become aware of a lingering chill or a hollow, persistent pressure centered right in your midsection, there is no need to aggressively dismantle its presence tonight. Even noticing the simple shape of that internal restriction is entirely enough for this moment. Now, Bring into your quiet field of vision one specific interaction or ancestral baseline that has been demanding your constant mental vigilance today. Perhaps a moment where a primary boundary was completely ignored or a family pattern repeated itself without a single sign of modification. Do not attempt to clean up the details, and do not blame your intellect for reaching for the old metrics of defense. Simply notice the raw, heavy weight of this internal restriction, observing how it registers in your physical frame when you try to force your organic presence into an impossible standard of complete independence. Perhaps you can gently name this emotional pattern, recognizing it as the ancient, urgent laboratory your mind uses to reshape your spirit. If it feels right, you might imagine placing the full burden of this domestic history directly into the dark, silent throat of an ancient forest well shaft held loosely within your mind. But as you hold this image gently in your awareness, let the desperate necessity to force an immediate alignment begin to loosen, just a fraction. Watch what happens when you stop fighting the natural growth of the timber, allowing the heavy weight of that ancestral worry to rest quietly down on the mossy well floor without the aggressive pull of the cords. The early stain of that primary imbalance does not need to be violently scrubbed away or completely cured before the sun rises. You might simply observe the quiet, steady flow of your breath moving around the dry stone walls, creating a gentle space where there was once only sharp, exhausting friction. There is no urgency to achieve a state of perfect reconciliation, nor are you expected to arrive at a total integration to rest well tonight. You can return to the plain reality of the present moment whenever you are ready, letting the mental pictures fade softly into the quiet dimness of the room. The space around you is entirely vast, fully capable of holding both your hidden landscape and the unaligned responses of your family without cracking under the pressure. Allow the darkness to wrap around your physical frame completely, knowing that for these remaining hours of the night, nothing is being demanded of your performative protection, and the water of your mind is free to settle out of sight, receiving the dark exactly as it falls. In a short while, our path will take us down toward a stone-floored tea annex at twilight to see how a tangled knot of coarse hemp twine interacts with the space. We will discover how easily the human hand recovers its true vitality when we permit the cord to be cut without a single forced pull, and how a distinct, unmeasured bundle reveals its subtle utility, precisely because it does not try to fish for ancient validation. But for now, simply let your abdomen cool and allow your spirit to rest in this spacious underground clearing. The descent from the high, drafty mountain huts leads naturally toward the quiet stone annexes where the warmth of the lower hearths pools into silent rooms before the winter sets in completely. Within a stone-floored tea annex at twilight, a young temple assistant named Yuka stood before a large cedar storage chest, her body locked into a posture of exhausting, unyielding tension. The air inside the quiet room smelled richly of wild mountain thyme, dry cedar bark, and the bitter scent of roasted chicory tea. Yuka had spent 2 full seasons managing the logistical supplies of the temple, yet her internal landscape remained completely paralyzed by a deep generational wound. Her predecessor, an older relative who had managed the annex before her, had been a deeply critical, demanding figure whose rigid expectations had shaped Yuka's entire understanding of her own worth. This relative had recently left the temple permanently due to an unexpected dispute, leaving behind a legacy of intense household friction and an emotional debt that could never be collected. Yuka carried a physical record of this complicated inheritance, a massive tangled knot of coarse hemp twine that had been left behind in the bottom of the storage chest. This bundle was a chaotic labyrinth of rough fibers, pulled tight by years of hurried use, packed into an unyielding mass that seemed completely impossible to separate. The young assistant treated this knot as an indispensable test of her ultimate value, operating under the hidden, anxious belief that if she could perfectly untangle every single cord without breaking a single strand, she would somehow retroactively fix the chaotic dynamics of her childhood home. She spent her twilights huddled by the low oil lamp, pulling at the dry hemp fibers with a tense, rapid energy, trying to force the stubborn cordage into a clean, organized alignment. Yet, the relentless friction of the task was shredding the material. The rough twine cut deep grooves into her thumbs. The fiber core began to fray under the pressure, and her own lower stomach remained locked in a tight, hollow ache behind the navel. This mass was tied under a bitter winter, and the cords refused to yield to my hands. Yuka whispered into the dim annex, her wrists trembling from the cold exhaustion of the pull. If I abandon this bundle or cut the threads, the old confusion will remain an absolute failure, and my own capability will look like a total illusion to the temple elders. I am spending all my strength to straighten the inheritance of a house that has already closed its doors, yet the knot only tightens before my eyes. Near a low clay brazier at the corner of the room sat an aged temple tea master named Master Shinji, who had spent 40 winters observing how the wild herbs unfold in the boiling well water. He sat quietly on a square rush mat, his skin dark like the old iron kettle and his palms smelling faintly of wood smoke and dried leaves. He had watched the young assistant struggle against the hemp mass for days, noting how her breath caught whenever a thread refused to budge. Master Shinji stood up slowly from the fire, walking deliberately across the slate floor until he stood right beside the workbench. He did not offer an academic discourse on the nature of attachment, nor did he reach out to take the tangled twine from her fingers. Instead, he reached into the firewood basket and gently placed a single, small piece of unrefined charcoal directly onto the very center of the tangled knot, letting Yuka observe how the dark carbon rested easily on the rough fibers. "Look at the unforced density of this charcoal piece resting on your labor," Master Shinji said softly, his voice carrying the slow, unhurried rhythm of the deep valley streams. "You have turned this storage room into a permanent courtroom, Yuka. You believe that by breaking your own fingers to untie this ancient string, you are executing a necessary defense against the person who left it tangled. But you are simply tearing the cord that serves you because you refuse to look at the immediate presence of the fiber. You are demanding that this winter evening resolve a knot that was tied winters ago." Yuka looked down at the dark mass, the black dust of the charcoal settling slightly into the rough hemp grooves. "The inheritance was left in complete disorder," she replied, her shoulders rising defensively against the chill. "To drop the bundle feels like an absolute surrender to a broken system. The twine is all I have left to make right." Master Shinji reached out and took a small pair of iron kitchen shears from the hearth wall, gently placing the cold blades against the outermost loop of the vibrating mass, letting the assistant feel the sudden, massive shift in tension as the individual thread parted under the metal. "Look at how the space receives the room when the pulling is stopped," the old tea master whispered, letting the severed loop fall loosely into the firewood basket, where it sat without any forced shape. "This stone annex holds its quiet, precisely because it allows the tangled things to rest, without trying to pull the whole current backward to undo the history of the box. It does not preserve its peace by straightening every piece of cord, nor does it require a perfect alignment to warm the tea. When the weather warps the vine, the valley does not split its own cliffs to prove it was misaligned. It lets the wild briars grow over the old walls, trusting the floor to hold the debris without a single demand for compensation. The strength of your presence lives not in the rigid unraveling of your childhood home, but in the patient space that lets the bundle sit in the basket while the hand remains empty. Stop treating every anxious thought as an absolute truth. Let the cord rest here in the dark, so your lungs can discover their own air." The old man turned and returned to the warmth of the clay brazier, leaving the assistant alone before the open chest. Yuka remained entirely motionless, the cool twilight moving across her face as the oil lamp began to flicker slightly in the draft. The physical reality of the severed thread sitting inertly in the basket seemed to bypass the defensive calculations of her hypervigilant mind. She looked down at the empty hemp cord in her hand, then out at the dark courtyard where the stone walls stood in absolute silence under the rising stars, noticing for the first time how the vast landscape sustained its weight by letting the rocks rest where they chose without a single rule to judge their placement. She felt the damp, cool air moving across her stomach, carrying the clean scent of dry cedar bark, and she noticed how the tight, cold constriction deep behind her navel began to loosen. Her lower stomach expanded naturally, taking in a slow, full breath that had been restricted since the first days of her youth. She had been trying to build a sense of safety out of an exhausting, rigid chase, and the sheer effort of forcing the past to become clean was breaking her life. In that quiet twilight by the clay brazier, a subtle transformation began to open within her awareness, though she did not suddenly become entirely free of her ancient family patterns. She did not pretend that the early neglect or the critical words of her relative did not leave a real, lasting mark of sorrow on her thoughts. But she made one small, quiet shift in how she related to her history. She chose to stop the habit of treating every memory as a current emergency that must be solved, letting the tangled bundle remain exactly where it sat in the firewood basket. As she prepared to sit by the fire with an unhurried, steady presence that required no perfect lineage to feel completely whole, this internal surrender of the iron shears invites us to look directly into the deep, hidden mechanics of our long-standing family defense patterns. The exhausting weight of carrying a generational wound does not grow within our center, simply because our early environment contained a genuine lack of safety. Nor does it persist because our childhood home was shaped by an unpredictable relative. The true suffering accumulates through the massive, complicated web we build inside our own current thoughts long after the primary events have settled out of sight. We attempt to manufacture an absolute sense of protection by continuously replaying our early interactions, analyzing the historical imbalances under a harsh internal light, and using the tools of private shame to keep the dynamic active. When we treat our immediate peace as something that must be withheld until our ancestors are perfectly reformed, we turn our own heart into a drafty annex, running from chest to keep the ancient fires burning. This frantic internal engineering is heavily driven by a deep fear of uncertainty, an ancient belief that unless we maintain our rigid protective vigilance, we will remain completely exposed to future rejections. We spend hours rehearsing the precise choices we would make to balance an old familial debt, trying to guarantee a permanent vindication that will retroactively heal our sense of inadequacy, and turning our private grief into a solid identity of being a permanently broken survivor. We become completely fused with the image of the neglected helper, using blame as a strange fuel to whip our tired minds into a state of hypervigilance. We convince ourselves that unless we are constantly reviewing our scars and measuring the depth of the initial neglect, the truth of our survival will be entirely erased from the earth. We confuse this exhausting mental loop with actual restoration, rebuilding the old structures of panic because we are terrified of what it feels like to simply let the twine sit without a final understanding. Ancient Buddhist insight offers a vital, liberating distinction between the natural friction that life presents and the secondary layers of suffering we actively construct on top of it. Think of the inevitable presence of an early family void as an ancient laundry well shaft cut deep into the forest floor, surrounded by old mountain stone and covered in dead leaves. The empty shaft is an objective fact of the terrain, a static condition of the forest that contains no active hostility toward the integrity of your immediate path. This primary difficulty brings a plain, authentic coldness to the clearing. Our true psychological torment, however, is the furious, exhausting labor we perform, trying to manually fill that immense stone throat with our own vital energy, frantically demanding that the ancient stones produce a fresh stream of validation to prove we are worthy of the clearing. By demanding that the dry well alter its historical geology to make our modern life feel perfectly secure, we trap our own nervous system in a state of continuous, agonizing friction, breaking our own wrists against the simple presence of the empty space. Profound liberation does not require you to deny the reality of the initial neglect, nor does it ask you to pretend that the childhood friction did not leave a real, lasting mark of difficulty across your nervous system. Genuine peace arrives when you completely alter your relationship with the emptiness itself, realizing that your spirit can rest comfortably in its unfulfilled history, precisely because your inner baseline offers a solid foundation rather than a defect that must be corrected by a family voice. When you stop treating every missing validation or crooked relationship line as a personal indictment that must be fixed by frantic internal litigation, The chronic tightness behind your navel begins to soften completely. You can observe this exact mechanism playing out within your own thoughts as you rest in the quiet darkness of this room tonight. The intellect may still want to pace the perimeter of your old family rooms, checking the details, seeking a way to force the distant past into the neat, geometric lines of an absolute explanation. This is merely the old habit trying to secure your safety through absolute control, trying to convince you that peace lives behind a perfectly settled history. But in this quiet hour, you are entirely permitted to let the heavy shears rest. You do not need to discover a single reason or win back a single validation before you allow your body to relax. In a short while, we will bring this open, porous awareness down into the small, practical details of your daily routine. We will discover how this heavy demand for retrospective validation operates in our modern interactions, and how easily the heart recovers its natural vitality when we choose to act like the overgrown forest well. For these next few moments, let the sheer effort of your overthinking dissolve into the bed beneath you. You are vast enough to let the empty spaces remain without losing your anchor. This internal inheritance pattern operates most vividly in the quiet, uncounted corners of your contemporary routine. It is the distinct, tight pulse that forms in the lower stomach when you stare down at a silent digital interface, waiting for an explanation or a sign of validation that is delayed, continuously checking the glass panel to guarantee your place in the timeline of another. We encounter this heavy friction when we lie completely motionless in the dark hours, tracking an old family mistake made during a recent holiday gathering, wishing we could strike that exact interaction to force it into a more symmetrical shape. It appears when we scan the carefully curated milestones of others through a glowing window, instantly convincing ourselves that the hidden, slow cooling of our own journey is a sign of absolute ancestral failure. We force a serene expression to reassure the room, smiling while feeling heavy inside, while behind our navel, a deep pressure throbs from trying to pull our natural pace into alignment with an artificial configuration. We even experience a sharp wave of internal criticism when we simply sit down to rest, wanting rest but feeling guilty for resting, as if our right to occupy space must be continuously earned by manufacturing a more accepted version of our family story. Bringing the clarity of the overgrown forest well into your morning does not mean you must completely abandon your social duties or live without a healthy respect for your daily obligations. Instead, the practice of freedom reveals itself in the brief, unmeasured spaces between your sudden impulses. When an unexpected silence or a sharp piece of criticism disrupts your routine tomorrow, you might choose to take one slow, deliberate breath before you attempt to force a resolution. In that single, unmeasured pause, you are electing not to throw a new layer of panic over your awareness. You are allowing the cold drop of that temporary discomfort to move cleanly through the open slats of your presence, without immediately treating it as a total threat that must be smoothed out by a frantic act of performance. You can offer deep care to the people in your life, without demanding that their behavioral clock remain perfectly synchronized to guarantee your own emotional stability. When you notice an old family dynamic beginning to loop through your mind, you can recognize that the concept is merely a passing shadow entering a flexible pavilion, not a permanent structural crack in your foundation. True rest is not a prize you receive for finally sealing every single relationship of your history. It is the natural capacity of the deep well to remain completely steady while the wild green ferns grow over its stone throat beneath the earth. You have total permission to let the heavy shears drop to the floor tonight without needing to earn the stillness you hold. Tomorrow, when the noise of the world requires you to step back onto the steep trail, you might carry this flexible awareness with you. If a moment arises where your path takes an entirely unpredicted turn, remember the unrefined granite that protected the life within precisely because it possessed no solid resistance to the weather. You do not have to settle the entire framework of your future before the sun rises. You might simply choose to meet the next hour with a slightly softer gaze, allowing the structure of your life to take its own natural form, one spacious breath at a time. In a short while, the final lines of this evening's reflection will begin to dissolve into a much deeper state of rest. We will allow the imagery of window screens, storage chests, and heavy shears to fade softly into the background, leaving only the unconditioned presence of your physical breath. Let the remaining expectations in your abdomen loosen completely, knowing that the spacious mind remains perfectly whole, even when it reflects nothing but the vast, empty dark. The active, seeking calculation of your ancestral comparison is completely dropping away now. The vigilant, tracking intellect that spent the daylight hours reviewing the exact structure of old family rooms and measuring your security against the missing validations of others can finally lay down its heavy toolkit. The vast, unmeasured expanse of the night is opening up beneath your physical body, inviting a total stillness into every fiber of your muscles. You can feel the heavy, settling density of your frame pressing down into the bed, an unconditional rest that requires absolutely no historical realignment from your stomach. The small, internal echoes of your late night panic are losing their sharp definitions, softening into the quiet dimness like a smooth stone resting at the bottom of a dry well. Your breathing is growing remarkably quiet. The cool air enters through your nose, moves softly down into your center, and leaves without meeting a single resistance or lineage loop. There is no need to direct this movement, no need to measure its speed, and no need to force a single inhalation to be more validated than it wants to be. The thick iron shears of your rigid holding have fallen completely from your hands, leaving your fingers open, soft, and resting loosely against the sheets. The physical structure of your abdomen is expanding with a gentle, uncomplicated freedom, letting go of the ancient friction that held your navel in tight alignment through the long afternoon. Let the specific truth of this evening's reflection sink quietly into the deepest spaces of your consciousness. The realization that you do not need to reshape an old relationship to deserve a clean horizon on this hillside is settling into your heart, bringing a deep, soothing coolness to the areas that felt uncompensated or broken. You are returning to a clear, unmapped ground, an internal home where the deep moss of your awareness knows exactly how to hold the unreturned gesture without a single demand for compensation. For these remaining hours of the night, the intellect is entirely relieved of its duty to track, to forecast, or to balance the generational ledger of your entire social history. The room is perfectly still, holding your sensitive nature as a structure of genuine value rather than an error that must be repaired before you can sleep. Your jaw is loose, your eyes have fallen into complete relaxation, and your mind is expanding to meet the quiet, uncomplicated rhythm of the dark. You have total permission to leave the storage chest completely unorganized tonight, letting the unresolved injuries of your day dissolve like loose soil, settling into the wide, dark valley floor. The vast, cool reservoir of your being is expanding, opening out toward a dark, silent clearing where the soft moss allows the midnight current to move cleanly without a single cord to pull it back. The slow, rhythmic breathing of the night continues to soothe the landscape, reminding the heart that it is completely safe to drop its ancient vigilance. Deep within the forest clearing, the chilly mountain wind has finally ceased its blowing, leaving the green ferns of the shaft to rest in absolute silence under the heavy clouds. The wild briars and the damp moss do not resist the deep shadow, nor do they try to force the dry stone throat to fill with water. They remain perfectly steady, holding their hidden roots in the dark ground precisely because they do not fight the autonomous timing of the earth. Your mind can settle into this very same quality of accommodation tonight, letting go of the exhausting requirement to continuously defend your scar or justify your value for the morning. You can trust this wide, accommodating ground, letting the heavy iron tools of your old vigilance slide completely out of your thoughts as the dark hours carry you further into rest. Slide down into the deep, unmeasured current of this sleep, allowing the darkness to hold you in a rest that requires no visible harvest. The pass is still, the foundation is stable, and you are completely safe to drop the watch. When the ancient stone walls are left entirely to the shade and the green vines carpet the empty depths, who remains left to convince before the morning opens? This unmeasured depth of the wild clearing requires no external decoration to prove its stability, nor does it wait for a single sign of skyward approval to validate its place in the forest. The active mind is fully invited to step down from the stone edge, allowing the historic imbalances, the silent rooms, and the uneven structures of your past to rest openly upon the cool, dense soil of the valley floor. Like the patient stone blocks that form the ancient lining of the well, your core awareness holds its position perfectly through the seasonal transitions, without needing to alter its internal architecture to please a passing traveler. You are completely permitted to be an unresolved space in this hour, a quiet sanctuary that permits the autumn rain to fall without needing to build an artificial canopy to shield the ground. Your limbs are growing remarkably heavy now, dropping into the deep security of the mattress as if your entire physical frame is being gently cradled by the thick, sheltering moss of a silent forest basin. Let your breathing expand into a slower, more rhythmic cadence, a deep tide of air that enters your center like a cool mist rising from the valley streams at dusk. There is no urgency to govern this flow, no expectation to make it look smooth, and no judgment if a long sigh escapes your lips before you slide further into the dark. Every slow exhalation is a direct invitation to release the hidden, microscopic holding patterns in your abdomen, and the constant historical tracking you have been carrying behind your eyes. You are letting go of the desperate necessity to repair your childhood rooms or project an impeccable timeline into the world to protect your spirit from the cold air. The blank margins of your consciousness are completely safe, carrying an intrinsic, deep peace that has never been diminished by the things that remained unsaid at your primary table. This quiet, unmapped territory is the true home of your spirit, a wide sanctuary that has remained fully intact beneath all the frantic scripts you have written to keep yourself visible to others. In the middle of this deep dark, the frantic demand for external validation is rendered completely silent, as the body remembers the immense relief of simply non-doing. You do not have to settle a single transaction, find a missing reason, or heal every private wound before you allow your head to sink completely into the pillow. You are simply the spacious witness to the night, the deep stone that filters the mountain water, the quiet sky that lets the wind pass without keeping a record of its velocity. Let this heavy, comforting stillness anchor your presence, allowing your sensitivity to rest in a warmth that needs no surface validation to remain completely whole. The ancient cedars outside continue to drop their dry bark into the dark soil, trusting the deep earth to carry their history without a single effort of resistance. They do not cling to the growth that has served its purpose, nor do they try to force the branches to bloom during the hard frost. They rest completely in the natural alignment of the winter, allowing their roots to dig deeper into the quiet ground where the energy is hoarded in absolute safety. You can let your consciousness slide completely into this identical state of non-resistance, falling softly through the heaviest, quietest depths of deep sleep, where all your remaining arguments disappear into the velvet dark. Let the stillness support your physical frame, let the quiet cushion your mind, and let your awareness dissolve into the vast, beautiful landscape that needs no explanation to remain perfectly at peace. The silence that fills the room now is rich, heavy, and entirely supportive, holding your whole presence without asking for a single word of justification or proof. The thoughts that carried such an immense weight during the hours of daylight have lost their sharp definition, turning into soft, transparent ripples on a vast pool whose surface has finally become completely still. You no longer need to find the correct language for your unfinished business, nor do you need to defend your erratic path to the quiet darkness. The night itself is a trusted ally, a wide field of absolute listening that does not judge the quality of your work or the irregularities of your history. It simply allows you to be exactly as you are, a traveler who has carried a heavy armor for many miles and has finally chosen to drop it into the high grass by the side of the road. Feel the cool, clean air of the evening resting gently against your skin, a soft reminder that you are safely grounded in the physical reality of the present moment. The past has already wound its way down the slopes, leaving behind only the dark, fertile soil from which new, unscripted things can grow whenever the seasons naturally turn. There is no urgency for the dawn to break, and there is no necessity to prepare your defenses for the trials that wait in the light of tomorrow. For now, the darkness is absolute, The channel of your spirit is completely open, and your breath moves like a slow wind through the valley. Quiet, unhindered, and entirely at peace. This profound quietness expanding through your consciousness requires no effort to sustain, as it naturally accommodates every layer of your weariness without demanding a single change. When you look at the broad catchments that wind through the low valleys, you see how easily they allow the heavy winter rainfall to pool, never grasping at the water or attempting to force the current into a narrower channel. The stone banks remain perfectly stable, precisely because they are open, letting the natural elements pass through without creating a barrier. Your presence holds this exact quality of non-resistant strength tonight, vast enough to let the lingering memories and unfinished questions of the day float past without catching on a single edge of internal friction. You can trust this wide, accommodating ground, letting the heavy iron tools of your old vigilance slide completely out of your thoughts as the dark hours carry you further into rest. Let your mind drop even deeper into this state of effortless surrender, where the boundary between your physical frame and the quiet room dissolves into a single soft presence. The active intellect may still try to send up a small, automatic reminder of tomorrow's obligations, trying to convince you to step back onto the busy workbench of life optimization. But you can perceive these thoughts as nothing more than distant ripples on a deep, dark pool, whose surface has finally turned to glass. They carry no authority over this space. They demand no immediate response, and they cannot disrupt the profound stillness of your center unless your mind reaches out to hold them tightly. You can simply let them slide past the edge of your attention, watching them dissolve into the broad, welcoming darkness that now cushions every nerve and muscle. Your breathing is flowing with a slow, effortless cadence, a simple tide that fills your chest with the crisp clarity of the ridge and carries away the last traces of internal pressure with every soft exhalation. This unfortified clearing you occupy is your original sanctuary, the deep, clear reservoir of the self that existed long before you ever learned to value yourself solely by how smoothly you could shape your identity for the world. In this quiet dark, you are not measured by how perfectly you managed your emotions, nor are you judged by the moments of deep weariness that crossed your mind during the day. You are simply the quiet presence that notices the soft rise and fall of the breath, the gentle ground that remains steady behind every shifting mood, the clear open sky that remains unaffected by the weather passing through its emptiness. Allow this sense of absolute validation to wrap around you like a heavy, protective blanket woven from the softest mountain moss, shielding your heart from the cold drafts of self-criticism and worry. There is no line left to draw in this hour, no internal flaw left to polish away, and no debt left to pay to the image of an idealized life. The high granite peaks outside continue to face the starlight in absolute silence, holding their rough surfaces and split crevices without any internal effort to look smooth or geometric. The stone does not look back at the heavy storms of the past season with a sense of regret, nor does it rush toward the morning to prove its value to the valley below. It simply rests on its own immense, pre-existing foundation, allowing the natural world to unfold around its ridges in its own grand, unhurried time. You can let your spirit glide into this identical stillness, drifting down through the softest, heaviest layers of deep sleep, where all the remaining perimeters of your defense disappear completely into the quietude. Let the darkness take the last of your concerns. Let the stillness support your physical frame, and let your awareness dissolve into the vast, beautiful rest that needs no fortress to remain completely whole. When the ancient stone walls are left entirely to the shade and the green vines carpet the empty depths, who remains left to convince before the morning opens? This vast clearing of the wild landscape asks for no structural revisions to maintain its balance, nor does it search the high branches for a single token of external validation to justify its position in the valley floor. The calculating mind is completely welcome to drop its tracking tools right here at the edge, allowing the ancient imbalances, the unvoiced rooms, and the uneven architecture of your history to settle cleanly upon the soft, patient loam of the forest earth, like the unmoving stone segments that form the quiet lining of the old well shaft. Your core awareness holds its grounding securely through every shifting season, without needing to alter its internal layout to satisfy the demands of the modern sky. You are fully permitted to exist as an unfinished clearing in this hour, an open ground that lets the dark mist float past without needing to build a rigid fortress against the passing shadows. Your limbs are growing remarkably heavy now, sinking into the absolute security of the bed as if your entire physical frame is being gently cradled by the rich ancient density of the forest basin. Let your breathing expand into an even slower, more spacious cadence, a deep tide of air that enters your center like the cool evening wind moving through the canyon brush at twilight. There is no urgency to govern this flow, no expectation to make it look smooth, and no criticism if a slow, heavy breath escapes your chest before you slide further into the dark. Every long exhalation is a direct invitation to let go of the hidden, microscopic tensions in your stomach and the constant historical monitoring you have been carrying behind your eyes. You are releasing the desperate necessity to fix your childhood spaces or project a perfectly balanced timeline into the world to secure your right to exist. The quiet margins of your awareness are completely safe, holding an organic, deep tranquility that has never been altered by the speed of the landscape outside your door. This quiet, unmapped territory is the authentic refuge of your spirit, a wide space that has remained fully intact beneath all the frantic routines you have practiced to keep yourself visible to the world. In the middle of this deep dark, the constant pressure for external validation becomes entirely silent, as the body remembers the profound relief of simply non-doing. You do not have to resolve a single conflict, find a hidden answer, or repair every private regret before you permit your forehead to grow heavy against the support beneath you. You are simply the spacious witness to the night, the deep loam that cradles the seed, the quiet sky that lets the wind pass without keeping a record of its velocity. Let this heavy, comforting stillness anchor your presence, allowing your sensitive heart to rest in a warmth that needs no social milestones to remain completely whole. The rare night flowers along the western slope continue to open their petals in absolute privacy, trusting the deep shadow to sustain their growth without a single ray of dawn light to justify their existence. They do not compare their development to the midday blossoms, nor do they strain their stems to match the speed of the open meadow. They rest completely in the natural alignment of their own unique season, allowing their roots to drink from the damp earth where the energy is gathered in absolute safety. You can let your consciousness slide completely into this identical state of non-resistance, falling softly through the heaviest, quietest depths of deep sleep, where all your remaining calculations disappear into the velvet dark. Let the stillness support your physical frame. Let the quiet cushion your mind, and let your awareness dissolve into the vast, beautiful landscape that needs no industrial clockwork to remain perfectly at peace. The silence that fills the room now is rich, heavy, and entirely supportive, holding your whole presence without asking for a single word of justification or proof. The thoughts that carried such an immense weight during the hours of daylight have lost their sharp definition, turning into soft, transparent ripples on a vast pool whose surface has finally become completely still. You no longer need to find the correct language for your unfinished business, nor do you need to defend your erratic path to the quiet darkness. The night itself is a trusted ally, a wide field of absolute listening that does not judge the quality of your work or the irregularities of your history. It simply allows you to be exactly as you are, a traveler who has carried a heavy armor for many miles and has finally chosen to drop it into the high grass by the side of the road. Feel the cool, clean air of the evening resting gently against your skin, a soft reminder that you are safely grounded in the physical reality of the present moment. The past has already wound its way down the slopes, leaving behind only the dark, fertile soil from which new, unscripted things can grow whenever the seasons naturally turn. There is no urgency for the dawn to break, and there is no necessity to prepare your defenses for the trials that wait in the light of tomorrow. For now, the darkness is absolute, the channel of your spirit is completely open, and your breath moves like a slow wind through the valley, quiet, unhindered, and entirely at peace. This profound quietness expanding through your consciousness requires no effort to sustain. as it naturally accommodates every layer of your weariness without demanding a single change. When you look at the broad catchments that wind through the low valleys, you see how easily they allow the heavy winter rainfall to pool, never grasping at the water, or attempting to force the current into a narrower channel. The stone banks remain perfectly stable, precisely because they are open, letting the natural elements pass through without creating a barrier. Your presence holds this exact quality of non-resistant strength tonight, vast enough to let the lingering memories and unfinished questions of the day float past without catching on a single edge of internal friction. You can trust this wide, accommodating ground, letting the heavy iron tools of your old vigilance slide completely out of your thoughts as the dark hours carry you further into rest. Let your mind drop even deeper into this state of effortless surrender, where the boundary between your physical frame and the quiet room dissolves into a single soft presence. The active intellect may still try to send up a small automatic reminder of tomorrow's obligations, trying to convince you to step back onto the busy workbench of lifestyle optimization. But you can perceive these thoughts as nothing more than distant ripples on a deep, dark pool whose surface has finally turned to glass. They carry no authority over this space. They demand no immediate response, and they cannot disrupt the profound stillness of your center unless your mind reaches out to hold them tightly. You can simply let them slide past the edge of your attention, watching them dissolve into the broad, welcoming darkness that now cushions every nerve and muscle. Your breathing is flowing with a slow, effortless cadence, a simple tide that fills your chest with the crisp clarity of the ridge and carries away the last traces of internal pressure with every soft exhalation. This unfortified clearing you occupy is your original sanctuary, the deep, clear reservoir of the self that existed long before you ever learned to value yourself solely by how smoothly you could shape your identity for the world. In this quiet dark, you are not measured by how perfectly you managed your emotions, nor are you judged by the moments of deep weariness that crossed your mind during the day. You are simply the quiet presence that notices the soft rise and fall of the breath, the gentle ground that remains steady behind every shifting mood, the clear open sky that remains unaffected by the weather passing through its emptiness. Allow this sense of absolute validation to wrap around you like a heavy, protective blanket woven from the softest mountain moss, shielding your heart from the cold drafts of self-criticism and worry. There is no line left to draw in this hour, no internal flaw left to polish away, and no debt left to pay to the image of an idealized life. The high granite peaks outside continue to face the starlight in absolute silence, holding their rough surfaces and split crevices without any internal effort to look smooth or geometric. The stone does not look back at the heavy storms of the past season with a sense of regret, nor does it rush toward the morning to prove its value to the valley below. It simply rests on its own immense, pre-existing foundation, allowing the natural world to unfold around its ridges in its own grand, unhurried time. You can let your spirit glide into this identical stillness, drifting down through the softest, heaviest layers of deep sleep, where all the remaining perimeters of your defense disappear completely into the quietude. Let the darkness take the last of your concerns. Let the stillness support your physical frame, and let your awareness dissolve into the vast, beautiful rest that needs no fortress to remain completely whole. When the ancient stone walls are left entirely to the shade and the green vines carpet the empty depths, who remains left to convince before the morning opens?